Welcome to this little Resolve tutorial on creating linear ACES plates from different camera sources. I'm Finn, I work in VFX, and I do this all day for a couple of years now. Ingesting plates is one of the parts of my job, basically. So there's lots of misinformation out there on how to create shots for Nuke and how to do a proper round trip to Nuke. And we want to just clear things up here a bit, or I want to clear things up a bit. So I prepared a timeline with a couple of RAW clips and ProRes clips from different cameras. So we get Sony X-OCN from the Sony Venice here. We have some Arriraw. We get ProRes from the Alexa. We have Blackmagic BRAW, DNG from the DJI Zenmuse drone, and a red clip. And so this would be, I think, the most likely footage that you will receive to create VFX from it. There's obviously going to be a lot more different footage out there, and there will be a different sort of ingesting workflow for each one of them. So that's something to keep in mind, right? You need to understand the basics of how to linearize something and how to bring it into Aces, because Aces is the future, and I'm not gonna go with anything else in terms of workflows here. So yeah, let's just get started. Our end goal is to create EXR plates, linear EXR plates, shots for Nuke, and then pull them back into Resolve and then grade them without any loss in quality, or without, or with the least quality loss that is possible. So we look at this clip and you look at it and say, yeah, this looks fine. This looks like something that comes out of the Sony Venice. But how are we going to get it into Aces? How are we going to get it linear? And the cool thing is about Sony RAW that you can go into the RAW settings here per clip and just go like clip. And you can go and just select Aces and then just select linear gamma and you're done. It's really cool. Now, there's all those other things here like color temperature, tint, exposure. And that's something that you will have to deal with every RAW format out there. Is this kind of stuff gets baked in as soon as you develop the RAW. And when you do VFX, you need to develop the RAW before you start VFX, right? So that's something we need to decide right now. And sometimes the stakeholders or the DI house, they will send you a sheet saying like, please decode the RAW like this, and this is our delivery specs. And then you sort of have to think like, okay, how can I make that happen for them so that they get the correct thing, because they might mix your VFX shots with non-VFX shots, and so you want to develop the RAW in the same way that they will do it during color grading. So that's something to keep in mind. But for now, we're gonna leave this all to as default as it is. So this is like as shot. What you can also do is you can go to your project settings, go to the camera RAW tab, and you can sort of preset this for your whole project. So you could say like, okay, everything that's Sony RAW should be Aces linear. So that's totally possible. And by the way, I'm not using any custom settings in Resolve at all. We're just gonna go with YRGB, and we do everything manually and with notes. So I don't like their Aces implementation at all, and I also don't like the color manage stuff. I'll just do it like that. That's what I like to do. So here you can set like the default for everything, and you can say, yeah, use camera metadata for exporter, that's fine. And so that's what we're gonna do. And then you could set this just to project, right? And it would do the same thing, but because we just set it up for the whole project in terms of Sony. So now you would say like, this looks weird, this doesn't look right. That's exactly correct, because that's gonna be linear and your display isn't linear, and we don't have any color management applied to our project. So what we can do is we can go to timeline grade, and that will apply a grade it's like an adjustment layer on top of your whole timeline, if that makes sense. And what we want to do is we want to transfer this to your display space, whatever you use, 709 or sRGB. In my case, I don't have a broadcast monitor connected, so I'm just using sRGB. And I'm using the acesTransform OFX for this, and this would be the same thing if you know Nuke. This would be the same thing as like setting your viewer up here. basically that's what we're doing. So we set the output transform to sRGB in my case, and then we got a nice looking image. But just keep in mind that you want to disable this before export, because we actually want to export those linear values. And even though they look clipped and broken and everything, don't worry about that. That's just how linear files look when you view them on a non-linear screen, which I don't think there's any linear screens out there. So yeah, we'll just keep this on for now, just so we can see. And this looks cool. This looks correct in my eyes. So let's go on with it, right? Then we have Arriraw. And I'm going to disable the timeline grid, just so we can see what's in here. So what Resolve does for Arriraw, it decodes it as AcesLogC Alexa white gamut, so that it looks the same as a ProRes that's recorded. Now the other tools like Hero or Nuke Studio or I think even Flame should also do this, and the Arri RAW converter that you can download for free from Arri, they will actually give you more options, so you can do the same thing as with Sony RAW and decode straight into Aces. We don't have that option here in Resolve. That doesn't work. So we can go to clip still, and yeah, like the color tab is just weird. So let's reset this. But you can go to clip and you have no options in terms of color space in Resolve. So you cannot do anything with that. So we'll just leave it to camera metadata. Again, it doesn't change much. So we know it's AlexaLogC Alexa white gamut. That's just something you need to know. And we're gonna drop in an AcesTransform, and we're gonna say AcesTransform is input is Alexa. Now the naming here is a bit bad. In this case, Alexa for the AcesTransform in Resolve means LogC with an ISO of 800 in this case, and the output transform we want to do Aces. And the Aces in Resolve means Aces AP0, Aces-2065-1, how it's named in Nuke. So that's what we want to put out in this case. And to properly linearize, we would have to know the exposure index as well. Now, practically speaking, if you get something from the Alexa, it's 99% going to be 800 ISO, and to be honest, even if it's 400, you can use 800. It's fine. Don't sweat it. Because if you want to export it back, then you would need to remember, like, oh, it was 400. And Aces only gives you, like, Aces in Resolve only gives you those two, even though there are a bunch more. So, yeah, let's just stick to 800 for this one. Now, we have this nice ProRes clip. Now, with ProRes, you don't have any camera RAW settings to worry about. You don't need to talk to anybody because it's perfectly clear. They send you a ProRes. They will 99% want ProRes or DPX back as AcesLogC Alexa white gamut. So same as source is what they want back. You can say that when you have something that's been debayered and sort of developed already in camera, and all those decisions, like all those like highlights and whatever fine-tuned red, all those settings have been committed to in camera. So there's absolutely not going to be a question of how to deal with this. Well, anytime you deal with anything raw, you need to make sure that the whole, that everyone that has to work on those files is aware of how to decode them properly. Especially if you mix VFX shots with non-VFX shots, because then you might have, like in grading, you might have a timeline with a bunch of ProRes shots. There's going to be some Arriraw shots. There's going to be, DNG shots, whatever, and you just need to make sure that they're handled in the same way across the whole pipeline. So yeah, this will, anytime you have RAW, there will be some discussion, and it's going to be annoying, but that's just what you need to deal with when people shoot RAW. And there's also a reason why, if you want quick turnarounds, just shoot ProRes on the Alexa, perfectly fine. ProRes 444XQ is great. Let the cameraman, the DOP, just commit to his settings, and everything will be fine. There's no worries. Now, how do we deal with this? We deal with it the same way as we did with the Arriraw. So we just plug in input transform, we do Alexa, and output transform, we do Aces, and we're done, right? And this looks like, crap. So we're gonna go into here and just enable our nice viewing LUT. And it looks really nice. Okay, then we go into Blackmagic BRAW. Blackmagic BRAW is obviously very, very well supported in Resolve, but nowhere else. So we can't just drag it into Nuke. So we can't decode it into Nuke yet. We also don't have any Blackmagic log options in Nuke, so we cannot like export Blackmagic log back. That's something to keep in mind, and it's also not very consistent inside of Resolve. So there's a Gen 4, Gen 5 color science is what they call it, and there's the Blackmagic design color space with a gamma of Blackmagic design film. But then you look at the AcesTransform and you look at the input, and there's only V3 and not V4 and V5. And what am I? Yeah, this is. I mean, it's, in my opinion, it's really badly made by Blackmagic, especially for camera that they should support like perfectly. There shouldn't be any confusion, but it's very unclear to what is. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna do Aces AP0. AP0 is the same as 2065-1. It's the big space. Now, personally, I would probably just decode everything as AcesCG, but you don't have the options for all of them. So if we go back into the Sony RAW, there is no option to go with this small Aces AP1. You can only do the big one, and the same is true if you decode Arriraw in the Arri RAW converter. So we're just gonna keep it all on Aces AP0. We just have to know that, and we're gonna do linear gamma, and we're gonna keep it at ISO 800, and we have those three values, you know, and we get the highlight recovery and gamut compression that you need to, you know, discuss. And yeah, that's also done. Very easy, very cool. I'm gonna skip the DNG because it's weird for now, and we're gonna jump into the red. Now, red has always been a big pain when it comes to color management, just because there's so much choices, right? There's so many choices. So there's red space, red log, red gamma, 2, 3, 4. For people like me that mostly work with Alexa footage all their lives, this was just the first time I looked at it. I was so confused about what does that all mean, you know, why. And but what they did is they introduced the IPP2 color management or color science, and that's what you want to use. If somebody says they want like the red log film or whatever, just try to convince them otherwise, and just say, yeah, let's do IPP2. That's way more simple and way more streamlined and very close to how like AlexaLogC works. So in our case, what we want is red white gamut and the gamma curve of LogC G10. So this is going to be like your new default AlexaLogC type thing that everybody really likes. And we're just gonna do the ISO to 800 because that is what we want in this case. Yeah, so this is a bit annoying that this is like goes away. If we go to camera metadata, we see a bunch more other stuff because it was shot on like Dragon Color 2. Whatever, we want this, and this is fine. Discuss this with whoever is working on this. If I work on this, I definitely do it like that. And also on red, you don't have the option to do to go with Aces directly. So we're gonna do this, use the AcesTransform to just go from, and that's one of the defaults that's great about the IPP2, that's straight into any Aces system, really. So we're gonna choose RWG, so RWG stands for red, white, gamut, and then LogC G10. And we're gonna do this to Aces, and again, it's gonna look weird. We're gonna go and activate our timeline grade, and it still looks weird. Why does it look so weird? Let's see. Maybe it, yeah. Maybe the color temp is, yeah, the color temp is like completely off. So this is, you know, the fun stuff that you have with RAW formats. You know, let's just put this to 3200. I mean, it doesn't look great. Kind of wonder why. Sound looks good. Also looks good. Yeah. See, this is the fun, and you're gonna stumble across many of those shots where you're just like, that's weird. Why? And then you just double check all your stuff. Check, you know, is it really? It looks like it was 800. The color temp was something else. I don't know. And then you might want to like go into camera metadata and just see, okay, color tempo set to 5000 with a -16 tint. Okay, maybe we want something like that. You know, -16 tint. Wow. And that's just all the stuff that you need to discuss with whoever is responsible. See, yeah, this looks much better. So, yeah, that's the fun stuff you stumble upon. But yeah, this is now Aces linear, so that's cool, and we can just export that. And then the last one is the weirdest one, which is the DNG from the DJI camera. Now, no, all DNGs are the same, and this one, for example, that I got from their website, enables you to debayer straight into dgamut and dlog. Now, I have never seen this option on actual production footage. I've always just gotten Blackmagic P3D60 and 709, so I don't know where this comes from. This really confused me the first time I saw it when I downloaded the sample clips. So you might not have the dgamut option, but then there's no Aces dgamut to Aces transforms, even though DJI is part of the Aces or whatever, but they just don't seem to care. So what we're going to do is we're just going to choose P3D60 with a linear gamma. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the Colorspace Transform. Now, the Colorspace Transform is a bit different to the AcesTransform because you can choose color space and gamma separately. It doesn't really use the same Aces transforms that Aces uses, so it can be a bit different. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't do chromatic adaptation, so it doesn't adapt the white point. We're going to go with P3D60 here, debayer straight into P3D60. So we already have the 60 white point, and that's what Aces uses, so that's not going to be a problem. So input color space, we're going to do P3D60. Here we go. We use input gamma. We choose linear. At least we can debayer linear. And then output color space is going to be Aces, and output gamma is going to be the same as the input, so linear. So that's what we end up with. Nice linear image. Timeline grade is activated. This is going to be the image that we export. This is what we're going to be looking at. Now what DJI recommends, and I found this to actually work quite well in the RAW settings, is to raise the exposure by 1.4 in Resolve. I found this in some tech document from DJI. You know, take it with a grain of salt. It tends to give me more like scene linear values that make more sense for compositing, but I'm also not very happy with how this is handled at all. So, I mean, if you can avoid it, you know, put an Alexa on a drone, but this will probably be fine. I like to use it. I'm just gonna leave it at 1 for this shot because it's already like, I think it's already pretty hardly exposed. So I'm gonna leave it like that for me personally now. If it would be like a wide shot, crazy wide shot, and it looked too dark, I would probably boost it up just to get the values up. And I like to do that in RAW, so yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Now that we have everything in here on my timeline is now Aces linear, so it's all the same color space, so that's awesome. Then you can go to our timeline, deactivate our timeline grade, so we don't need it anymore. And even though this looks very horrible, this is exactly what we want. So we can go to the delivery tab, and you know, you choose your folder where you want this to render to, and then you're gonna choose individual clips. EXR is what we want for Nuke or for VFX in general, and then you get all those nice options. Basically, RGB float means 32-bit export, and RGB half means 16-bit export. Now, you wanna do 16-bit, you don't need 32-bit for your plate, because there's like no camera that's gonna shoot more than 16-bit of usable data anyhow right now. So, and then you have to like choose a compression. Now all of those like zip, RLE, PAZ, and no compression are lossless. You don't want no compression, that's just ridiculous. And PAZ, RLE, and zip, they can give you different file sizes based on the input. This is zip is not zip 1, the one you want to use for Nuke. So sadly it doesn't support zip 1 scan line. So I'm going to use PAZ just to keep the size down a bit. PSE is made for like real plates, while Zip 1 is more for full CG, and you can read all of this in the EXR white paper. But that's what I'm gonna use for now. You know, if you want to save some storage, you can also use DWAA. That's perfectly fine for if you don't care. We're gonna go with max quality and PSE compression. That's perfect. We want to render at source resolution, so whatever the source resolution was, so we don't have to worry about our like timeline settings, and we have mixed resolution on the timeline. It all doesn't matter. I'm gonna set the color space take to Aces AP0. It's Resolve really doesn't write that much metadata into into your files, which is very annoying, but that's just what it is. It doesn't write stuff into EXRs. That's mostly the issue. And I'm gonna disable sizing and blanking output and force the debayer to the highest quality. So especially with raw stuff, I want to just have the highest quality. And now we also maybe want to add some handles, so you can add the handles here. We're just gonna leave this to 0 now. That's fine. Because we decided we don't need handles. This edit is perfectly logged. That's all we're gonna do. Then I'm gonna jump into file, and I'll gonna give this a name. Now you might think like source name would be a good idea, but it isn't really, because let's say you have one clip multiple times, like one source file you use multiple times in different edits and stuff, then they will just like overwrite each other. So then you would like click use unique file names, and then you get really garbage named clips that I don't like either. So what I'm gonna do is a custom name, and yeah, you can use tokens in Resolve. So you can just do like for this one I'll do file name. Usually I use like a custom shot name or whatever, but I didn't set this up. This depends obviously on your pipeline. You know, do it as you please. You want to use shot name, the source name. That's perfectly fine. So we're gonna use file name, and then I'm gonna drop in a timeline index. So that just gives me like a file name underscore 1 for the first clip in my timeline, 2 for the second one in my timeline. Really useful, again, like a unique token per clip. And if you reconform it, you always know which clip goes first, and it's really easy to sort them, even if you don't have an XML. So I just like to do that. And then I'm just going to add the color space name to it. And that's really important because, again, there's not going to be much metadata, and people need to know that it's like Aces AP02651 and not AcesCCT. So we'll add this Aces, let's do like underscore 2065, or yeah, we just use AP0.
You don't have an alarm set for 6:50.
Oh, thank you, Siri. I didn't talk to you. This is what happens when you set your phone to silent. So we use Aces AP0, and then what we need to do is actually add a dot to it, or else it will do AP0 and then the sequence number for the files, because we were going to write a file sequence, right? And I'm going to set each clip starts at 1001. This is just sort of a VFX convention, and I love using this. The first frame should always be 1001 in my opinion, because if the edit changes and you need to add frames before, you know, you can't do that when it starts at 1, because then you would have like frame 0 and frame negative frames, and that's just really, really dirty. Then there's also for things like FX work, you might want to have like a pre-roll and stuff like that. So keep it at 1001. It's a very good idea to do when you do VFX. It's just always to start your shots at 1001. I'm not going to do any of this, but what I'm going to do is, because I don't like having them all in one folder, obviously, I'm going to just do a subfolder based on the same name. So I got a subfolder, and then in that subfolder, I'm going to have all the single frames. I'm going to, again, start each clip at 1001. This is perfectly fine. I'm not going to preserve source directory levels. I don't care. I'm not going to use commercial workflow. This is, yeah, this is like grading stuff. Okay, so that's all good. That's all good. That's all looking very good. And we're just going to add this to our render queue and hit render. And it's just going to render them pretty quickly. Resolve is really, really fast compared to other tools. Yeah, so we have rendered this. Now let's jump into Nuke. So in Nuke, you want to set your project up, and you want to also use Aces here. And so what you choose is, it's default, it will be on Nuke, so you want to choose OCIO. And then here you want to select Aces. Now I can't do this because I just set an environment variable for my whole system to always just use Aces on every OCIO program, because I have multiple OCIO programs like Blender and stuff, and they where you can't choose it manually, where I have to do it with an environment variable, and I just wanted for everything that has OCIO just use Aces, because why not? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna find the files and drag them into Nuke, and we're gonna do a little bit of a round trip really quick. So it's gonna be my test plates, render, and we're gonna go render. So this is what we have now, right? We have the file name, we got an index number, and then we got the Aces AP0, and the same goes for here, and the dot that we put in here actually gives us a really nice file, right? So there's our file sequence. We got details. See, they're like 14 megabytes, 15 per frame, so they're quite heavy, even though they're already compressed, but losslessly, right? So this one is 55 megabytes, the R3D, because it's like 6K. So resolution really makes a huge difference when you do VFX. The more resolution you have, the more heavy the files will be. So, I mean, if we just look at the rendered files right now, that's 2.68 gigabytes for those few things that we had. But that's just something you need to deal with. You need those EXR plates. You don't want to have compressed media in Nuke. That's just really annoying. Now, read error permission denied. That's a fun one. Let's do it like that. Yeah, okay. So we now have them in, and now Nuke is supposed to read the color space from the metadata, right? It's supposed to be like, oh yeah, this is AP0, this is Aces-2065. But it's not doing that. And this is something OCIO is still a bit fresh, so sometimes that stuff just goes wrong and doesn't work. In case of Nuke, I've never seen this work based on the file name. Maybe if you have a custom pipe, this will work, but this is a box standard Nuke with no special stuff in here. So I'm gonna use color space, and I have to set this to Aces-2065-1. Once we set it to 2065-1, and we look at it, and we set our viewer to sRGB, we can jump into DaVinci and just compare, right? We can also do the same thing here. We can go to timeline, activate our viewer, and then just raise this up and just have a quick gander if this is sort of, yeah, this matches, right? This is perfect. Very cool. So obviously looking at different programs together, they might, you know, if you have like a calibrated display, they might like apply the calibration profile to one. I don't have that. I have a calibrated monitor, but not a calibrated profile. So I don't have that issue, but just keep that in mind. You know, always compare stuff in the same program. So that's why we needed to do a full round trip with those files. And the same goes for all of them. So we have this anamorphic clip, and yeah. So now we need to decide sort of how we want to export this back. And there's many different choices that you can do. And I'm going to just show you sort of a few of them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to de-squeeze this really quickly. I already made an anamorphic thing here, so just set this to none and you're good. Anamorphic format. So this would be our ProRes source. So for ProRes source, because we know this used to be AlexaLogC, and that's probably what we want to deliver. You know, depending on your workflow, let's just go into my test plates right here and just go with like comp output, right? And we're gonna do Alexa shot dot DPX. We just want to render straight up DPX files from. I need to reset this a sec. The banes of using a 4K monitor with Nuke. It's a bit annoying. So yeah, we decide we want to render DPX out because that's the workflow we decided on. And we just want to output back AlexaLogC. So we're going to go into Arri and choose AlexaLogC EL800 because we know that's how it was ingested, right? But we need that information, of course. So, but we do know, and I'm going to choose 12-bit here. And I actually want a little bit of a subfolder here. So let's just do Alexa shot. That's fine. Alexa shot, yeah, whatever. Obviously give this a correct name and not as something that I'm doing here. So I'm using an input as my output, which you can do using Nuke, which is awesome. So you can use any input. as your output, so we're just going to do that. Again, the input here is scene linear, which is wrong, so we need to put this to Aces-2065 to get the correct colors. Export this as Alexa, as a DPX, and we set this to input. Yeah, it's fine, and just press OK. Oh yeah, we need to press create directory. Thank you, Nuke. There we go. And then to test the whole pipeline, we're gonna pull it back into Nuke here. I mean Resolve. So we're gonna put back the Alexa shot, and we're obviously gonna make a new bin and call this comp. And this is sort of the first thing that you always need to do to check. So is the length correct? The length is correct. We have the, you know, everything is fine. But it obviously, this looks weird because we still have our viewer thingy activated. So let's just disable that. We go to clip. Oh, very nice. And we're gonna swap in between. Yeah, this looks different because we still have the LogC to Aces thing applied here. So if we now compare it, they're identical, right? There's nothing changing. So our workflow has worked perfectly fine. And there's no question about how this is supposed to go because it's already baked in. I love ProRes. It's awesome. Makes your life so much easier than all this RAW stuff. But if you have RAW, so for this one, you would just do the exactly the same, because if your DI or finishing house is gonna use Arriraw and DaVinci, then there's also no question because you can only debayer it in a certain way. But then you're gonna deal with like the BRAW. So BRAW, I'm just gonna copy this here and just be like BRAW clip. Now there's nobody's telling us that we can't just export this in the same way. So we can also do LogC 800 weight gamut. It's perfectly valid. We're in Aces. We can output whatever we want. We can input almost whatever we want. It's so flexible. It's so nice. But let's just say we decided that we want to keep it Aces and we want to use acesCCT, which is another log space. Yeah, because the grader says, yeah, I like acesCCT, so that's another way you can do it. And, you know, just a reminder, you want to put log footage into DPXs or ProRes, and you don't want to put log footage into EXRs. There's a huge thing why. It's basically comes down to if you put a log into 16-bit EXR, it's like putting in like 10-bit. So it's really horrible. So don't do it. EXR is only for linear stuff. And in this case, our output is supposed to be acesCCT. So that's also very fine. So we're gonna export that and then re-import it into. There we go, BRAW clip, we got that. So again, always check the length. There might be something off with like frame rates and stuff. You just need to make sure that you have all your source material that you need. And now this is LogC, right? I mean acesCCT. So we could just start grading from this. We could, if we want to add an acesTransform to the end and be like output transform is supposed to be sRGB, and then we end up with this. We just need to set acesCCT as input, and then we are at the same that we had before. Or you could even say like, okay, you know, we export this as acesCCT, but our colorist wants to use Alexa, right? Then the acesTransform doesn't give you the option to transform transform to Alexa, just from. So we would need to go in and use like Colorspace Transforms and be like, okay, input Colorspace, it's gonna be Aces AP1 because acesCCT has acesCG or Aces AP1 primaries. The input gamma is going to be acesCCT. Our output color space is going to be Arri Alexa, so that's Alexa white gamut. It's the naming in Resolve is just horrible. And then we're going to output LogC. And you might think this is fine then, but it's really not, because using the color space transform, we are only adapting the color space. I mean, color space is such a bad word for it. It's really the gamut or the primaries and the gamma, but we aren't not doing the white point adjustment. So for this, you need a chromatic adaptation plugin here. That's ships default, and you need to say, okay, we come from Aces, which is a D60 white point, to D65, which is Alexa. And it's just something you need to know. It's really annoying. And then you need to choose your color space and in what color space you want to do this transform. In our case, it's AlexaLogC. So as you can see, it doesn't do a lot, but it's giving you the correct white point. So, you know, this is a bit red. It's hard to see. And this is more neutral in my case because this was actually shot with the correct white balance and stuff. So what we can now do is we can now just go ahead and like grade this like we would any AlexaLogC stuff. People are very used to this. But we can of course also like even do an AcesTransform from Alexa to sRGB, and then you end up at the same thing again. So as you can see, it's very flexible. You can go back and forth and whatever and get correct stuff happening. So yeah, I mean, you could even take this and be like, okay, we have acesCCT input. I really want to grade in Blackmagic 4.6K film, and my output color space is supposed to be 4.6K video Gen 3 or whatever that is. So yeah, whatever you want, you can go back and forth, and Aces is crazy flexible, so it's very cool, very good to use. Another method you can do is you can obviously like re-export Aces linear. That's perfectly fine as well. So we'll take the one Sony frame that we have. Just go into it's like Venice. So it's gonna be Sony Venice, and we're not gonna use DPX. What we're gonna do is we're gonna use EXR, and we can put out an Aces-2065 EXR. Again, go in here and make sure this is actually set to Aces AP1, AP0. So this is what we want to put out. We want to go Sony Venice, and yeah, as you can see, the white balance is sort of a bit horrible because it was set to daylight, even though the 3200. But yeah, that's a creative decision. In our case, we want it to be warm. So I'm gonna choose compression-wise. I'm just gonna go with zip 1 scan line. That's fine. You know, I could go and like do PAZ as well. For this case, it's one frame. It doesn't matter. You don't really need to take right Aces compliant EXR either. It's all of them work. It's totally no problem. 4K DCP, and we're just gonna render this. And yeah, same input as output. We're not gonna change anything, so that's awesome. Let's render it. That's heavy. And let's jump back into Resolve. Go in here, go Venice, import the Venice clip. There we are. Drag this on here. Now we compare it. Yeah, it's exactly the same. Very cool. But now that grader decides like, oh, I want to actually grade in whatever Sony thing because I have all this other footage that I decoded as Sony, right? So he would go into another clip that would be X-OCN that didn't have any VFX done to it. You would go in here and just choose like S-Gamut 3 Cine, and Sony has awesome support for Aces. It's so good. It's really, really good. And we're gonna choose S-Log 3. And then we got our EXR clip, which obviously doesn't have those options anymore. So we use an AcesTransform inside of Resolve, and that's also perfectly fine. So it's different workflows that all do the same thing, and we choose we have to choose Aces as input, and then output we would have to choose Sony S-Gamut. And again, we can't do this. So we need to go the same way as we did with the Alexa stuff. And this is just one limitation of Resolve that annoys me a lot. So in this case, I probably wouldn't go through all the trouble. Oh yeah, sorry. We need to choose Aces. Input gamma is going to be linear. Output color space is going to be Sony S-Gamut 3 Cine, and output gamma is going to be Sony S-Log 3. Now, in this case, I actually don't know if S-Gamut 3 Cine is D60 white point or D65. To me, the Cine behind it probably should mean D60, as that's like cinema. That's sort of what it looks like as well. So let's just assume this is already D60. But you've seen how the chromatic adaptation works if we have to do that. Ah, you know what we can actually do? We can just check against the straight up debayering, right? So there's actually slight shift in here. That's very interesting. So here in Europe, most of the stuff is actually Alexa. So I'm not sure why this would be a different, why this would be any different, but welcome to RAW. So that's just something you need to deal with, right? You're not gonna necessarily have the same thing. What I would find interesting is if I grab a still from this grade, go to this and debayer this into Aces, Aces linear, and apply this grade. Now, are those going to be the same? Yeah. So for some reason, the debayering to Aces and then going to S-Gamut 3 using the acesTransform versus debayering straight into S-Log3 are in fact different. I would actually call this to be a bug. It really shouldn't be any different, but it's probably just a thing about like the SDK used by Sony RAW versus the transform that Aces have. And all of this comes down to, you know, just shoot ProRes Alexa. It's perfectly fine. You don't need any RAW, but if you have to deal with it, that's the stuff you need to deal with. And that's also why you should really test your workflow for any new camera that you get and make sure it's solid and, you know, deliver test files and be like, we want to deliver this from this source. Is this fine for you? Even though it might not match exactly what you had, you know, it's just something everybody needs to deal with when dealing with RAW. So yeah, I hope I cleared up some misconceptions. This is how you sort of do it. You would obviously do like VFX on here now. You can add CG, do whatever you want. Do all fun stuff. I hope this helped a bit because I've seen a lot of I've gotten a lot of wrong exports in the past, and I've seen a lot of people just like don't understand why this is actually why this is correct, why you want this, and how Resolve works in terms of like decoding RAW. So yeah, I hope it helped. I'm sorry that this took 42 minutes now to do, but I hope it helped. Let me know if it didn't, or let me know if it did. Yeah. Have a good day, I guess. I'm not very good at intros and outros, I guess. So it's something to learn.